A competitive economy leads to not just opportunities for all, it leads to a free society. Antitrust is one of these really strange areas that doesn't neatly break down along partisan lines. We need to make sure that technologies are being reinvested and used to empower our workforce, but to do so in a way that's safe and secure.
Jonathan, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be with you.
We are excited to have you on the big stage today, where you are going to be debating a very big question. Is big tech too big? What is your take?
Yes. So let me unpack that a little bit. It is hard to imagine a technology or a company or industry that has so much influence over society than big tech. Think about small number of companies control what billions of people across the world see every day. A small number of companies consume a massive amount of wealth relative to the rest of the economy. A small number of companies determine the pace of innovation and growth, not just for our country, but for our society at large. Now, that is not to say that these companies are bad. It's simply to say that we need more competition, we need more opportunity, and we need more choice. Here at Harvard Business School, where we have this wonderful debate today, there's a whole sea of people with wonderful, innovative ideas. My dream is that those people can start the next great public company, and that the Mag 7 will become the Mag 17 or the Mag 70. That is the world we should aspire to. But I am concerned that today's world only has enough room for a small number of companies who have a disproportionate amount of wealth and power.
Under President Biden, you had a say in shaping antitrust. Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve, and where we stand now?
Yeah, we achieved a lot in a very small amount of time. So thinking about big tech, we took actions against Apple. We took 2 actions against Google. We won a massive antitrust case against Google, the biggest monopolization case in 20 years. We also brought other cases that were just as important in the areas of healthcare, housing, agriculture, defense, and others, because what we believe, and I believe to my core, is that a competitive economy is a free economy. A competitive economy leads to not just opportunities for all, it leads to a free society. And so we're really about law enforcement, not regulation. We want to make sure that there are lines on the road, companies have rules that they have to abide by, so that the next entrepreneurs that come along have every opportunity to succeed.
What should the Trump administration be doing now when it comes to antitrust, in your opinion?
So I'm optimistic about the direction of the Trump administration. I think we've seen a trajectory over the last 10 or 15 years that is leading toward greater appreciation of antitrust enforcement. Free markets require competitors. Competition requires competitors. Free markets require participants and rules of the road. I think there's an understanding that if we are going to go lighter on regulation, we need to make sure that the marketplace can police itself through a competitive, vibrant marketplace. That seems to be the direction the Trump administration is going with respect to big tech and other areas. And that was certainly the position that we took at the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice.
So when it comes to big tech right now and the Trump administration, what evidence do you have that makes you hopeful?
So we started a very important case against Google. We litigated it in the DC District Court, and we won. It was a significant, momentous victory against a large tech company for violating the antitrust laws. We proposed a number of remedies, things that the court can impose to help restore some of the competition that was lost as a result of the anti-competitive behavior. The Trump administration recently filed a brief in that same proceeding, largely keeping intact our proposals. And I think this is consistent. When I was at the Antitrust Division in the administration, I saw just as much support from Republicans as I did from Democrats. And sometimes I saw opposition from Democrats that I didn't see from Republicans. Antitrust is one of these really strange areas that doesn't neatly break down along partisan lines. It's one of these areas that really breaks down about your philosophy for how you want the economy to work. Do you want an economy that creates opportunity for all? Do you want an economy that creates growth and greater geographic dispersion of wealth and demographic dispersion of wealth? Do you want an economy where entrepreneurs can come up with new ideas and that their ability to achieve terminal value isn't limited to an exit strategy selling to a large company, but where these entrepreneurs have the opportunity to build the next great business, thrive and succeed for the long term, employ lots of people, and bring great new products to market?
What do you say to critics who argue that American tech dominance is a strategic asset and regulation can weaken it?
The way to compete against China is not to be more like China. We are at our best as a country when we are putting our eggs in the basket of capitalism and competition. When we are allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom and competition is motivating companies to do better, to give more, to innovate more. That is how we are going to compete on the world stage. We are not a command and control economy. We are not an economy with state-owned enterprises or controlled enterprises. We are best when entrepreneurs have the ability to flourish and compete. And we want our big companies to compete. We want our big companies to thrive. I'm not here to say they should be out of business. I'm here to say that they need someone nipping at their heels to make sure that they do a better job.
Some say the problem with tech is less about size and more about accountability. In today's world, what does accountability look like for these tech companies?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of size and power, but let's unpack that a little bit. So the Mag 7, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, NVIDIA, Tesla. These companies collectively have over $500 billion in cash reserves. That's over $500 billion that is not being reinvested back into the economy. From 2020 to 2023, the Mag 7 spent more than $700 billion on stock repurchases. This is money that is not being reinvested back in the economy. A lot of the CapEx now in the Mag 7 is to each other, whether it's buying chips from NVIDIA or Google paying Apple over $20 billion for search defaults. This is money that is off the field that we need reinvested back into the U.S. economy so that we can thrive. And what we want are policies that make sure that they are doing that they have enough competition to do that. What we did at the Antitrust Division is we did focus on accountability. We focused on when companies, instead of competing on the merits through better innovation, were using their power not to control how they build their own products, but essentially these large companies are regulating smaller companies. They're telling these smaller companies, you can't build the product the way you want. You can't charge what you want. You can't innovate the way you want. Those kinds of restrictions that protect the dominance of the large companies, but limit the competitiveness of smaller companies are the kinds of accountability that we put forward at the Antitrust Division. At the same time, I think there are a lot of other important dimensions to this. Think about here in 2025, how much data tech companies collect. We have no comprehensive privacy legislation in the United States. Even after all these years, we have next to nothing. And I think when people look around and they think about the influence, the control, the amount of data that these companies have, they want some basic standards. I think of it as lines on the road. Again, we want these companies to succeed. We want them to thrive, but we want there to be room not just for them, but for others, new entrepreneurs as well. And we also want to make sure that there are lines on the road so that safety and security are top of mind and are protected by, not overly invasive, but surgically targeted government laws and rules.
And do you think American voters feel the same way?
Absolutely. These are extremely popular. And it's why there's so much support on both sides of the aisle. I think the sense is that Americans believe in having control over their own lives and destiny. And whether it's the government overreaching or a big company overreaching, they don't want somebody telling them how to live their lives. And I think there's a sense that the power of these companies, while there's a lot to admire and they're great innovations, come at a cost. And that cost is giving up control over your data, over your life, over what you think, over what you see. And it's important to make sure that we maintain our freedom by ensuring that we have a free, open, competitive economy with lots of different options, lots of different choice, and that companies really are innovating and providing services and products for the benefit of our people.
Does the advent of AI mean the end of the industrial age?
It's a significant change. I think we are experiencing a shift on par with the Industrial Revolution. AI is going to transform how we live our lives, how we think, how we work, the role of the knowledge worker. I think it's going to have massive effects for white-collar workers, for example, including people in my profession, like the legal profession. And it's exciting. There are going to be lots of great developments that come from AI, but it's also going to usher in a new set of challenges. The amount of data and energy, real energy that you need to operate these data centers and to generate the kinds of models and agents and services that run on top of these models is extraordinary. And so it is at any point in time when you have a major inflection, when you're shifting from one paradigm to the other, it's really important to make sure that we get it right early on, both in terms of health, safety, and security, as well as competition.
And so the wholesale change that you're talking about makes us think about political stability. What does this all mean for political stability?
Yes, I think we've seen firsthand that these technologies can have a massive effect on elections. It can have a massive effect on economic development and growth, and jobs, for example. And I think we have to think about all of those societal impacts to make sure that we are prepared for them. I'm a firm believer that you can't slow the natural pace of innovation, but you can harness it, and you can make sure that it's done in a way that is safe and secure, and that the benefits are shared by society that is collectively making the investments in those technologies. I think about, for example, big technology. The U.S. taxpayer has invested a tremendous amount of money in energy, infrastructure. U.S. taxpayers invested a tremendous amount of money in scientific research that has resulted in the development of these great companies. I just want to make sure that as a society, we get our return on that investment. If taxpayers are subsidizing the development and growth, then I think we can make reasonable demands in terms of we have a really deep concern and a deep issue in this country with our deficit and our national debt. And so that to the extent that we are investing in the development of these new technologies, there should be a return on investment in terms of making sure that the benefits that are generated from those investments can go back into paying down the national debt and reducing the deficit. I think that is perfectly reasonable. To the extent that the U.S. taxpayer is investing in these technologies, which is creating a tremendous amount of wealth, we need to make sure that it's generating jobs in the United States, good paying jobs where people can work. We need to make sure that technologies are being reinvested and used to empower our workforce, but to do so in a way that's safe and secure.
Do you think the average taxpayer understands that their taxpayer dollars have gone to the creation of these companies?
I think people often overlook the contributions that taxpayer dollars have had to scientific research at universities, for example. I'm deeply concerned that reductions in the amount of investments that the federal government is making in education and science and research will make us worse off, not just as a society, but as an economy down the line. I think about, we should always as a country be investing in technologies, in research, in developments that become a platform for everybody here to innovate.
Big tech says it's pretty good at self-regulation. Can you talk about some of the companies that you think are getting it right?
I think companies, particularly public companies, have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders. And regulation, companies, I believe, many of them want to act responsibly and believe that is good for business. But ultimately, they have an obligation to do what's good for their business. I think if, as a society, if we want to have guardrails, if we want to have lines on the road, then it's up to us to make sure that we draw them.
Microsoft and OpenAI now dominate. Are AI monopolies different from traditional tech monopolies?
AIs are an extension of traditional technology companies. So I think one of the things that we've seen in technology industries is that many of them are winner take most, and many of them develop into platform technologies. By that, I mean models or platforms that other people build on. And so one of the things that always concerns me is that if you own a platform, but you also compete on the platform, it creates a conflict of interest. And I think increasingly we are seeing these winner-take-most, very large platforms where the owner of the platform also wants to compete against others on that platform. And a lot of the behavior that I find concerning tends to flow from that kind of conflict of interest. But we're also seeing a world where these are not necessarily technologies that can grow up in a garage. The amount of energy, the amount of data and data centers it takes just to show up and for table stakes is extraordinary, and it's growing by the moment. So it's going to create a lot of investment, and to some end, we want to make sure that the investment in the compute, the chips, the data centers are coming from the great companies that the U.S. has fostered the development of over the years and that have built on their own backs and merits and hard work, wonderful businesses that have contributed so much to society. But we do at the same time want to make sure that just because you have success in one part of business doesn't mean that you have the right to foreclose the success of others elsewhere in that business. And I think you can see that in healthcare, for example. Pharmaceutical companies create life-saving medicines. Insurance companies pay for life-saving treatments. Just because companies do some things that are good doesn't mean that they should have license to be able to do whatever they want in any part of business.
So having come from the federal government, what is your take on the layoffs?
I'm deeply concerned. Obviously, we should be striving to improve government efficiency. But let's level set here. The federal workforce is a sliver of the national of our budget. 4/5 of the federal workforce resides out of Washington, D.C. 1/3 of them are veterans. And these are people who are working extremely hard, and they're focused on education, not to create curriculums. They're focused on making sure that the investments that the taxpayer is making in education, sound investments, are being used for their intended purpose and not wasted. The federal worker, I think, is often misunderstood in society. They are some of the most hardworking, dedicated people I know. That is not to say that we shouldn't always strive to improve efficiency. We should always do that. Doesn't mean that it also, there may be places where we can reduce, but I think de-investing or demonizing the federal workforce is a very dangerous thing to do. These are institutions that have dedicated so much. I think about healthcare, for example. We have public healthcare, Medicare, and then Medicare Advantage. One is administered by the government, Medicare. One is administered by private parties, Medicare Advantage. Guess which one is cheaper? Medicare. The one that's administered by private parties is actually more expensive. You can see the same thing in other areas like education. A lot of the things that are outsourced end up resulting in greater waste, greater abuse, because companies want to make profits. And not everything is well suited for that. And so, again, if the markets aren't competitive, where you're outsourcing, defense is another example, then we run a real risk that there is going to be a waste of taxpayer dollars. And so if we are going to outsource, we need to, one, make sure that there's accountability, that we have project managers inside the federal government who are making sure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. And then we also need to make sure that the companies that are bidding on and getting these government contracts are being held accountable to deliver the results that they promise, but also that they're bidding in a competitive market so that we're getting the best deal we possibly can as taxpayers.
So speaking of government contracts, we do have someone who is working closely with the president, Elon Musk. Does his influence in the government worry you?
I think it worries a lot of people, right? When, again, I come back to conflicts of interest. If somebody is figuring out how to reorganize our government and institutions that give out government contracts, while at the same time bids for those government contracts, at a minimum creates a perception problem. But I think it could also create a situation where even if someone has the best of intentions, they're making decisions that might be in the fiduciary interest of their shareholders. I think it creates a real concern. It's why usually when people enter government for those really important jobs, they have to not only disclose all of their interests, but in many instances they have to divest of them, something I had to do. And I think a lot of other people who have served in government have had to do. And so I think government is a public trust, and we want to make sure that the public knows that the decisions that are being made at any given moment in time are being done solely in the best interest of the public.
When it comes to giving business leaders advice right now, from your lens, what would you be telling them?
I would say there's so much opportunity that in terms of antitrust and bigness, don't be afraid to compete. Don't be afraid to go out there and build products and services. The government, even under our watch, and people had the perception that We were tough, and we were. But most mergers never got blocked. Most companies never got a call from the Department of Justice or the Federal Trade Commission. Looking at government and some of the things that I used to do in the antitrust world, it's really designed to make sure that we unlock value and unlock the opportunity for new businesses to compete. And I think we need more disruption. Like I said earlier, I think it'd be wonderful if the Mag 7 were the Mag 17 or the Mag 70. We want more public companies. We want more opportunities for entrepreneurs to bring products and services to the market, invest in the development and success of those products for the long term so that we can all receive the benefits.
And then what would be your advice to people in your role now under the Trump administration?
So my advice to the current administration is focus on where the puck is going. Ultimately, markets are moving forward. AI is going to be transformative, not just in consumer tech, but in enterprise tech, in healthcare, in defense, and so many other areas. It creates tremendous amount of opportunity, and a little bit of hard work on the front end will make sure that those markets are open and competitive for the long term.